Karen, could you introduce yourselves for the record?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm Richard Lloyd. I'm Chair of IPSA.
And Mr. Speaker, I'm Karen Walker. I'm the Chief Executive and Accounting Officer for IPSA.
Richard, can you open up by giving us an overview of your main estimate for 26-27 and the planning assumptions used?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first want to thank you and the members of this committee for your support in the past as we've changed the way that IPSA fulfills our statutory duties. We've ended the days of presuming that we know best at IPSA how best to support parliamentary activity. And our decisions are firmly based on the result of listening carefully to MPs and their staff. And as you can see in our plan for the coming year, we're going to step up our moves to reduce the administrative burden on MPs' offices. IPSA taking on more constituency office leases, more central procurement of the things that all MPs' offices need, simplifying the scheme of rules, clarifying the guidance and improving how we ask you to work with us online. But we're well aware this committee wants to discuss today the biggest element of IPSA's proposed estimate for the coming year, and I just want to take, if I can, Mr. Speaker, a minute to address that. We've increased the staffing budget by nearly 80% since 2019, with 4 benchmarking exercises, from £103 million to £184 million this year. And we've listened very carefully to the views of staff themselves and their representatives as to how best we can do more. That's why our priority for the coming year for staffing is to improve the conditions of existing staff, including recognising that office managers are taking on responsibilities that in the past were carried out by MPs, and lifting the pay of caseworkers. We want to ensure that ring-fenced funding is there for training and welfare. This Parliament, we're seeing quite different patterns of employment, with some offices choosing to have 10 staff or more within the funding envelope we provide. We don't dictate how the budget is used, although of course there are wider implications when MPs employ that many people on part-time contracts. But at the same time, we've been asked by some members to provide an additional staff member for every office to help meet demand. That would require an uplift to the budget of £26 million rather than the £11.5 million we propose here. Other members tell us that the headcount assumptions behind the present budgets are adequate. In other words, there's no consensus on a one-size-fits-all approach, Mr. Speaker, and Parliament has also placed a statutory duty on us to ensure our funding is spent cost-effectively, efficiently and transparently. So that's why we've proposed a more tailored approach to the needs that we've been made aware of, a £7.7 million funding package to enable MPs to hire more staff to tackle backlogs and deal with local crises. That funding will be made available through a lighter touch process than the previous contingency applications. Turning to the demands on constituency offices, clearly it is for MPs to decide how to undertake their parliamentary duties. But we all do what we can to support them in managing their increasing caseloads. One thing that would help us to do that is for better data to be obtained. We've received some anecdotal evidence that there is more need, but that has not provided us with a clear view on how casework is defined, and there are a surprisingly wide range of ways that demand is being responded to. So we now would like to work with the House services to better evidence more precisely what the different needs are, to assess working practices and to find practical ways to enable offices to better manage demand. But I do want to say directly to MP staff, IPSA hugely values what you do. We know you are under pressure. We want to make it easier for you to do your jobs. The answer will not always be more resources, but in how those resources are used. But we hear you. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to Karen and all of the staff at IPSA for developing a new way of working that puts first making it easier for MPs to do their parliamentary duties. They too are working extremely hard. The budget for IPSA next year is once again flat in real terms. Mr Speaker, I know everyone here takes very seriously the committee's role in scrutinising our budget. What I would ask is that the committee has at the front of your minds the twin duties that Parliament has given us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Charlotte, please.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask what IPSA's rationale and basis for the levels of pay in 26-27 for MPs and MPs' staff has been, and likewise for your own IPSA staff and directors. You referenced in your earlier answer about what MPs have been telling you and what officers have been telling you, but it strikes me that there's not been a formal process of consultation, so that's something that's been anecdotal. Where do you derive the basis on which you make the estimate from?
I'll cover that. So I'll cover the MP's increase first. The last time that IPSA reviewed the benchmarking for an MP's role was 2013. So this has not been done for quite some time. And obviously since then, the job has become a lot more demanding. There's rising casework, greater complexity, the economic pressures driven by issues globally and more domestically as well. And obviously there are increased safety risks that you're all experiencing too. And I think from an MP's perspective, you also carry the significant responsibilities in legislating, scrutinising government and representing constituents in Parliament. IPSA, as Richard has highlighted, has a legal duty to review MPs' pay each parliamentary term. So we did an interim payment last year, but ahead of the 26-27 decision, we carried out extensive public engagement and we reviewed public sector pay data, economic conditions and international comparisons as well. And we did do consultations on this with the public. Benchmarking across similar senior UK roles, so for example, police superintendent, chief nurse, NHS consultant, army colonel, and pay for elected politicians in other democracies indicates that actually MP's pay should be around 110,000 by the end of this Parliament, so it has fallen behind over time. As a first step, we have applied a 1.5% benchmarking uplift and a 3.5% cost of living increase for 26-27, and future adjustments will reflect economic and fiscal conditions and wider public experience. And that approach ensures MPs are fairly remunerated and that UK democracy is properly funded. If I turn to MP staff pay has been benchmarked 4 times since 2020, and decisions informed by inflation, by public sector, pay trends, market data and feedback from MPs and their staff, and there have been year-on-year increases to benchmarking and cost of living. Since the election in 2024, casework has grown in volume and complexity, and concerns have been raised about constituency and caseworker roles being undervalued, and turnover has also been high, particularly among caseworkers outside of London. And the new starting salary, for example, for an executive caseworker outside of London is now 33% higher than it was back in 2020. Benchmarking from November 2025 has showed that most roles have fallen behind market rates, so IPSA has increased pay range minimum and maximums by 5%, introduced a minimum pay policy above national living wage plus 3%, and applied a 2% uplift to executive 1 and 2 ranges where those caseworker roles sit. To set the 3.5% cost of living increase, IPSA has reviewed inflation, earnings data and wider pay settlements, and all staff will receive at least 3.5% unless opted out, with lower paid staff benefiting more due to those adjusted pay ranges. A small number of officers might struggle to fund that uplift, and IPSA will provide support, though many officers do have the headroom within their budgets. The additional staffing support that Richard referenced is £4,000 ring-fenced staff development fund per office, and that is for health and wellbeing and development. £7.7 million for staffing support fund for temporary pressures, and increases to the disability staffing and MP absence budgets as well. And those decisions align with our commitment to funding UK democracy and making sure that we pay fairly and it's market aligned for MPs and for their staff as well. And in terms of IPSA staff, we applied a 3.5% cost of living increase to all staff.
Thank you. To come back on MP staff pay and benchmarking, I'm interested to know how you compared the rates of pay with other professions requiring similar skills, which professions it was that were being looked at, and context-wise, particularly because a lot of roles within an MP's offices, particularly parliamentary assistants and so on, require degrees, and then of course there's implications for student loan repayments, marginal tax and so on. How is that factored into the benchmarking?
So we map job descriptions to define criteria. We determine the right level and function, so we look across benchmarking data and other roles, and then we set flexible pay ranges for each role, and that allows you as MPs the flexibility to choose the role, the experience level and the salary as per your office needs. And for such roles as an example, those executive one caseworker roles, we benchmark across comparable activities. So, for example, we've looked at administration, we've looked at communications, casework and welfare support, events management, public affairs, neighbourhood projects, media work and public services. We compare market quartiles then from our benchmarking tool, and we look at those across current IPSA pay ranges. And as I mentioned earlier, that November 2025 data showed that most roles had fallen behind the market. So we're increasing all of those pay range minimums and maximums by at least the 5%. And through the consultations that we did do during 2025, we also set out plans around competency-based pay and progression frameworks to better support staff and to make sure that salaries do reflect the skills and experience.
Thank you.
Alberta. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for appearing before SCIPSA. I would like to make a declaration, Mr. Speaker, that myself and Karen met a week or two ago to discuss some of the issues that I'm about to raise, and I would like to thank Karen for having given her time to come and meet with me. This is a question for Karen. We've heard from MPs and member staff that despite the proposed 7% increase in the coming fiscal year's budgets, the staffing budget is insufficient to ensure adequate staff recruitment and retention to cope with the significant increase in MPs' workload and casework. You've touched on it in some of the answers you gave my colleague, but can you tell the committee why you believe your estimate provides enough support for MP staff?
Sure. So staffing budgets depend on the staffing mix that each MP chooses, including how many people they employ and where those staff sits within the ranges of pay. When setting those provisional budgets, the board discussed focus on retaining existing staff and making sure that fair market-aligned pay, particularly for the constituency and caseworker roles, which have historically been undervalued. Recent improvements include recognising past service, enhanced parental care and MP to MP staffing loans. And MPs and staff have told us that workloads have increased since the last election. And whilst the 26-27 budget isn't intended to fund an extra FTE in every office, we are introducing that £7.7 million staffing support fund to help those officers that are facing that high demand. Since 19 and 20, staffing budgets have grown by almost 8%, and that's been driven by additional headcount, certainly after the pandemic, and then IPSA's automatic cost of living increases as well. And IPSA's account managers and payroll officers will be available to help officers plan and manage budgets, supported by house services as well as the members' HR advice team, for example. And as noted earlier, we will support any office who struggles to afford the 3.5% uplift and the benchmarking adjustments. But those budgets overall in aggregate are still underspent. And last year we offered additional support, but we only got 9 requests.
Alberta, if I can, Mr. Speaker, one thing that's important to remember, as you very well know, is that we've tried to strike a very careful balance between providing a budget envelope and not intervening in the employment relationship between MP and staff. So what we've done is proposed a budget envelope that gives that headroom, but as Karen has said, there are many, many different approaches to the number of staff and the pay that people have been put on, in particular in recent months. So we've tried to compromise between a one-size-fits-all and recognising that there is local MP constituency office decision-making to do. We've also tried to obtain better information, hard data about the casework, and that's why we want to work with the digital service and the House HR and others to better size what that problem is. We hear it, but we need better evidence. We think in the extra funding, the flexible funding we're making available, we've got a good response to that need. But we want to explore what we can do in other ways to help manage the demand, in particular in terms of casework.
Well, that's very welcome news that you're in listening mode and you are seeking further evidence. I think the committee would greatly welcome that. In respect of the health and well-being of staff, I think one of my colleagues might ask a question on this, but you did identify that the duty of care, the nexus between an MP staff and MP is not with the corporate body of the House of Commons, nor is it with IPSA, it is with the individual MP. How would you say that if an MP feels that their staff are working at capacity through no fault of the MP, given the amount of casework that the MP's team are having to deal with, how should the MP deal with that in order to discharge their duty of care towards their employees?
I would encourage you to speak to your payroll support officer. So give us a call, contact us, let's have a look at the case, and we will apply additional funding where we believe that that's the right thing to do.
Lovely. And just finally, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, you came to my office and we had a good meeting, and I was very grateful for the follow-up letter that you sent. You very helpfully identified in that letter the things that IPSA are undertaking. If I can just quote from that letter, you said, Karen, to me that we released provisional MP staffing budget figures for the next financial year pending approval by SCIPSA. What did you mean by that?
At the point that we had our meeting and last Monday we decided that it was right, with SCIPSA's permission, with Mr Speaker's permission, to share the provisional budgets. But they were always provisional until we met today.
I think, as you know, the cycle, the process that we have to go through, it's now March, it's nearly the new financial year. And what we've tried to do in recent years is to get that information out so that MPs and their office managers can start planning early. I was just talking to staff representatives outside who there is anxiety about this process and the uncertainty. But until we have had the estimate approved by the House on recommendation of this committee, we can't say that this is the budget for next year. What we can do is indicate that's what we're proposing.
Indeed. So just the final point is when you said pending approval by SCIPSA in reference to the staffing budget figures which had been provisionally released, you were cognisant that you awaited this body's approval of the staffing budget as part of the overall estimate. Is that correct?
The role of your committee, Mr Speaker, is to scrutinise the budget and, if you're satisfied with it, lay it before the House. So that's the clear constitutional arrangement, and that is in the Parliamentary Standards Act.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just to back up that, in fairness, quite rightly, staff of different organisations, whether that's union or non-union organised, have asked for the indication early in order for them to prepare their budget. So it's a response of IPSA on behalf of MPs asking for that early indication that it was brought forward. And in fairness, the indication of how the MPs spend the budget in general terms is up to the MP and the office manager to decide where the rises go as well, because we have had it in the past, and that's where we tried to stop too much flexibility where the MPs were not passing on the pay rise. So just to say, in fairness, they have been responding to what MPs' staff have been requesting. So the indication is purely an indication. But once again, it is the staff who have been pushing for that, or office managers, in order to try and work out the following year. So I think it's the right thing to do, and I hope we will continue to ensure that there is an early indication across staff. So I hope you won't go away thinking you don't provide that anymore.
We would like to provide the indication as early as we possibly can every year, Mr Speaker.
Thank you. That's good. Helena, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, I think, to echo colleagues, thanks to the IPSA team for a number of conversations that some of us have had with you in recent weeks. We appreciate the time you've taken in that. I just wanted to ask a point of clarity on the IPSA budget, the internal IPSA costs budget. The IPSA staff costs have increased by 7.1%. That is made up of a 3.5% staff pay award for IPSA staff and budget to hire additional staff in the commercial function of IPSA. Could you just clarify what those additional staff are for?
I can, yeah. And it's 2 individuals. There is also an uplift because we need some occupational pay cover for maternity. We have created a commercial team, a professional commercial team of 2 individuals because we want to centralise more services to remove the admin burden from MPs and their staff. So we've talked in previous years about the amount of administration that you need to do via the system. We would like to remove as much of that reimbursement and reconciliation activity as possible. So we are centralising services. We want to make sure that those services are professional, and therefore we've hired commercial individuals with that background.
Okay.
Just on that point, I think Jesse just wants to back you up on that.
I was actually just coming on a slightly related point on workload, so if I can do that, or I can follow Helen.
Follow Helena when she's pleased. Follow Helena.
Would you mind if I just add to Karen's point? 2 additional heads in IPSA are there to help reduce the burden on offices. As Karen has said, IPSA's budget we have kept flat year in, year out since I've been the chair. So there is an effort here to invest in reducing the administrative burden on MPs' offices, but that has meant that we've also kept our own budget flat.
Okay, thank you for that. And then another point of clarity, there was Alberto just referenced a session of the administration committee at which evidence was taken from the health and wellbeing team, and if I could just quote from that, Tessa Munt, one of our colleagues, said that there was a IPSA meeting on the 23rd of February. I believe that was a staffing budget drop-in session. I don't know if either of you were present at that.
I led it.
Right. So the quote from that meeting is apparently, I would advise that all offices look at who they are responding to and prioritise. You do not need to reply to everyone. Now, that quote's caused quite a lot of concern among the parliamentary community, both from members and members' staff, because I think many of us would take issue with that and feel we're here to respond to our constituents. So I just wondered if you could clarify whether that's IPSA's approach and whether that is the approach that has informed the estimate you've put before us.
So it's misquoted, unfortunately. So what I led the meeting, and what I said was, you need to understand how you best respond to your constituents. I didn't say at any point that MPs should consider whether or not they reply to constituents. I asked people to consider how they replied and how they managed those workloads. So that has been misquoted. And the meetings were quite supportive in terms of laying out more detail around what we are proposing in the budgets and how all of the additional support is there to help. But also we proposed the working group that Richard referenced in his introduction around helping to understand what's happening in the caseload currently and to seek the support of other house services, parliamentary digital services, the security team, the HR team and others to have a look at how we can better support through use of technology, combined full-time equivalent headcount to manage some of the security, administration, etc.
So I think we'll come on to the scope of that committee shortly, but just so everyone's clear, IPSA is not advising MPs' offices that we should not reply to all emails from constituents.
It is not. It is suggesting that we triage some of the responses to make sure that we've got the capacity to deal with the complex cases that come through. That is not suggesting for a minute that we do not respond.
On that, I think Maria wants to come in as it's a colleague.
Yeah, I just want to take slight issue with what you've just said. A couple of things you just said, because you said, Karen, please forgive me, because this might come across a bit harsh, and I know that IPSA is working incredibly hard in very difficult circumstances, and I'd like to thank you for the work that you have done. But we need to be careful when we talk about being misquoted, because I think that was a direct quote, and I have heard very, very similar things, and the importance is actually not what words were said, the importance is actually what was understood from those words that were said. And I have heard feedback from several places that the implication from IPSA was that MPs shouldn't respond necessarily to all of the correspondence from their constituents. And when you've just said, as a point of clarification, you need to triage, which I do in my office, I certainly do triage, but triaging to me means that my constituents do receive a reply. The speed of the reply depends on how they've been triaged. So I just want to be very clear that you are still saying that we should always reply, but there's also, even if you prioritise some things over others, still giving a reply still takes time. And I just want to make that exact point because I certainly had that feedback through my party and through other places as well. So I just wanted to make that very clear.
Just to help with clarification, I think MPs run their offices and there is no suggestion from yourself, just so we get this on the record. It is for the MPs to decide how they deal with their casework and how they answer their casework. I'm not being funny. There may be a letter that you don't want to answer because of the offensive nature of what it's to you. So what I'm saying is we don't, I think the flexibility has got to be with the MP and the staff. And I think we can all agree on that. And just reassurance, there was never an indication or a misunderstanding, whichever, just so we're sure that the MPs will decide and the expectation that they will answer the casework that is appropriate to be answered.
Yeah. And that was the discussion. The prioritisation of that is with you.
Okay. And then, so on this, the letter from Richard announces the deep dive into MPs' caseload, numbers, complexity, volume, etc. Karen, could you just outline what the scope of that review will be?
Sure. So what we would really like to do is just gather more data, more information. We want to be able to support MPs where we can and collaborate with house services to make sure that we're all doing the right thing in the right way. And then maybe, for example, some acceleration of activity that's already underway, for example, the digital office with Parliamentary digital services and others. It could be that we look at some shared resource across offices to take out the administration burden of all of the security. And Helena, you and I have discussed this personally as well. So I don't think that there is a particular limitation to that. I think it's more about collaboration across house services and IPSA to be able to support that management of the caseload and for us to understand, as Richard's already highlighted, the volume, the complexity, the data and how we might better support that.
Could I just make a point actually I was trying to make earlier on, which is, as you've said, Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely no intention by IPSA to dictate how an MP runs their office. But we talk to many different offices. Some of our staff are former staffers of MPs. And we can see some very different practices. We can see some ways that digital services can support the management of caseloads and the like. And I think in the context of what we're hearing, it's absolutely right that we, with others, it's not solely a question of funding or staff contracts or pay bands and the like or benchmarking. But what are the tools that we can fund or with, for example, digital services make available to everyone to help those practices that we see in offices that are managing their workloads in very different ways, potentially to make that available more broadly. So this is about us exploring practical solutions to help MPs meet that demand, and also at the same time in doing that for us to understand better what that demand is. Because I think if we came next year and said, Mr. Speaker, we'd like to fund, a particular kind of role instead of another kind of role, you would probably quite rightly ask us, well, on what evidence have you based that? And at the moment, we've heard a lot of evidence in terms of pleas for help, frankly, but we don't have that data across 650 MPs' offices.
Yeah, so there needs to be an evidence base, which I think everybody would agree. My question is, why are we only starting this process now when an estimate has been laid before us? why was this deep dive not done in the run-up to this estimate and forecast to adequately assess the caseload and the demands? And what would be IPSA's answer to that?
We've been asking for evidence for, I would say, I've been doing this for 7 years, probably 7 years, but I know we have a new Parliament since 2024. We've been speaking to staff reps, to staff in groups, to the wellbeing working group, and so on. We've done a lot of outreach to try to understand what the pressures are on offices and staff. We visit offices and so on. What we haven't been able to obtain, I mean, I've discussed this at very large meetings of members in the past. What we haven't been able to obtain is that evidence base across the 650 MPs. What we've done, though, is responded to a relatively small number of cases where MPs have said to us, can we have some additional funding this year? I think from memory it was 19 MPs have asked us for that, of 650. So again, we have some evidence and some, I think, very good input from staff reps and from the Wellbeing Working Group. But that is different to us saying, Parliament, we would like another £23 million based on evidence across 650 offices.
What is the formal forum for people feeding in that evidence ahead of the estimate? Like prior to today, what is that, the staff working group? Is that something else? Does it exist?
So we've had, I think twice this year, board meetings with staff representatives. We have numerous meetings with MPs and office managers. Karen and her team are at the office managers' meetings and so on. We don't these days, as I've said, which used to be the IPSA practice, make assumptions that we know what's going on in MPs' offices. What that hasn't given us, though, is a systematic evidence base, and what we can't do is that alone. We need to do it with the house services.
I'm conscious of time and we need to move on, but has IPSA ever asked to access the back-end data from caseworker software, which most offices use and have clear numbers? It wouldn't show you complexity, but it would show you numbers.
We have, and just to add to what Richard's just said, we did consultations that were open to the public and all MPs and staff in February and October last year, so we gathered some data from there as well. The data that is collected in caseworker, we have been advised by one of the teams in the House that some of that data isn't as accurate as it could be. So we need to validate the accuracy of the data that's coming through caseworker software, because people use it in different ways.
Okay. And then the question, so you referred earlier in your opening statements to the increasing security threats to both MPs and MP staff and what they are dealing with. Often the staff on the front line picking up the phone in the constituency office alone. And there is a limit to what we would say in a public forum about this and about how day-to-day practices have changed as a result of the increasing threat to MPs. If it's been factored in to IPSA's decision about MP pay, how has it been factored into IPSA's decision about staffing budget proposals? Because my understanding from our discussions, Karen, and I think it's mentioned in the announcement of the deep dive review, it has never been factored into staffing considerations, the increased workload caused by the additional security threats.
I mean, my answer to that would be it is implicitly part of an MP staff workload, absolutely. And as I've said, when the IPSA board and senior team have met staff representatives, that has always been a theme. Of course we take that into account. What we've done in recent years, though, is moved specific funding responsibility for certain security measures from IPSA into the central security funding budget. So that, again, this is where there are split responsibilities, and IPSA wants to work with house authorities, including security services, to better determine how we can use this public money to address that part of what MPs and their staff are on the receiving end of. We've got ideas, and we have plenty of, I would say, positive discussions with some members who are using certain tools, for example, digital tools, as we've said earlier. We have ideas about offices and the measures that we could support being put in place to make offices more secure and more safe. It's built in to every decision that we make. We would be completely negligent if that wasn't the case. What we're saying now, though, is it's time for all of us together to work on how we can address some of the root cause of that better, and recognise that that is a source of pressure on staff and MPs.
And we're not getting that data from all officers. So some are telling us how long people are spending on it, others are not.
We're going to go and try and capture that after. Right, Jesse, quickly, and then I'm going over to
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. Richard, IPSA was set up in 2009. You've been there for 7 years. So why is the online payment system so epically bad? I mean, it's so bad, I'm surprised that, I think it would have been bad in 2009, and I'm not surprised that anyone is facing concerns about workload, let alone mental stress, when they have to deal with something that's so amazingly incomprehensible and unhelpful. And when are you going to fix it?
I dislike people in my position saying I inherited an IT system, but that's the case.
You've been there for 7 years, Richard. Why haven't you fixed it?
It was brought into being, I believe, in 2018. That was when it went live. An investment had been made, and I think you would also quite rightly challenge us if we were to put that investment to one side and that sunk cost.
At the end, if we've done,
as we've tried to do over the years, not been the subject of an improved as far as we can within the constraints of that system.
You recognise the problem, and when's it going to get fixed?
We completely recognise the problem. We have put in our plan this year that there will be 3 different ways we're going to attack this issue. One is by changing the payment system. The other is by giving MPs a much better online information system. And thirdly, we are going to procure a new back office system. But the difference this time will be that we don't assume we know what's best for MPs and office managers. We want to design that with MPs and office managers.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. I have a really quick follow-up question on data, and then I want to move on to talk about office costs, if that's okay. My question about data is there was another type of data other than caseworker, which is email volume. And both Karen and Richard have heard me talk about this in a different setting prior to this, so you'll have to forgive me for asking this very direct question, because I think actually email data is something, well, we can look at campaigns and stuff. It's kind of an indicator of the workload and increased pressure on MPs' offices, because somebody at the end of the day has to go through those inboxes. So my question is, have you asked Parliamentary Digital Services, PDS, to provide a comparison and empirical data of what the email volume is coming into MPs' inboxes, and when was the first time you asked for that information?
We have been asking for that for quite some time, and we have struggled to get some of that data. I have been speaking to Parliamentary Digital Services very recently to now say we need to work together on this, all data, so caseworker and email data as well. And we get differing volumes coming through from officers when we ask officers for the data as well. It is about the empirical evidence now and the data, and we will continue to work on that.
Just to be clear, when you say quite some time, can you give us a better indication of?
I've been meeting with Parliamentary Digital Services on a monthly basis probably for the last 3 years.
3 years to get email volume data?
Not just to get email.
One of the things is to get email volume data,
yeah.
Which I have to tell you, being somebody with an IT background, is actually available in a report from Exchange Online from the Admin Centre. So I really have to put on record that I struggle with how long that has taken. And I don't think you've quite got it yet either, do you? Right, I'm going to move on to my questions about office costs and leases. Very simply, what provisions do IPSA have in place to support members with constituency offices with high leases and rents due to their location? I'm a Chelmsford in Essex-based MP. We suffer a little bit from being very close to London, so therefore high costs, but we don't get the London weighting when it comes to office leases. So, what provisions have you put in place there? And are members in these high-cost areas disadvantaged, do you think, by having less funding for other essential functions, such as communicating with constituents?
So if you feel that your rent or service charges or business rates or the VAT that is appropriate on those are unaffordable, then again I would ask that you contact us. We've been working one-on-one with some officers who have really struggled for the very reasons you outlined around the location of where they are and the lack of the London waiting. We will review the spending, we'll agree any additional support and any additional funding where that's needed, which may cover rent or business rates or the VAT, as I mentioned. And we'll just assess each case holistically. For the future, I think we may want to consider a central budget for such as business rates, because these vary wildly across different constituencies and they impact the office cost budget in different ways as well. So we need to do some further work on that.
Okay, thank you very much. What I would just say to that is sometimes offices are trying to struggle to stay within their budget, so then they cut down on other things that they might otherwise do, and other offices where they have that extra budget or they have cheaper rents, for example, don't have to struggle about it, so don't even have to think about it, so they don't constrain themselves. So just maybe something to think about. Offices don't always reach out because they don't know that they can or don't feel it's appropriate, but it doesn't mean to say that they're not disadvantaged by
I agree, and we can work on that, but 74% of MPs pay less than £15,000 a year in rent. And that does leave over £22,000 for office costs and where an MP would like to spend. But that's obviously 26% of MPs who may have a different experience. We would be very happy to work with officers on that.
Great, thank you. And then my final question is about how much office budgets have increased. They've increased by 3.2% or 1.1 million under resource subhead A, for those of you following along online with the papers, on top of 2.6 million capital funding for IPSA to trial centralising leases, which you mentioned just now. Do you think that this is enough to alleviate the office cost pressures faced by city centre MPs? And how will you prioritise which leases to centralise first?
I mean, the first thing on centralising is everyone must agree. So it's an obvious point.
What could possibly go wrong with that?
What could possibly go wrong? But the MP, the landlord, and obviously we need to be satisfied that the arrangements are right. So that's given us an immediate way of prioritising. I think from what I see at the moment, there are still a small number of offices where the rents are getting close to the limit of the budget. There are most that aren't, that are within budget. And I think the relationship that IPSA and our account managers now have with MPs allows for that conversation to have a more tailored approach. In the past, as with all of our budgets, it's been one size fits all and that's it for the year. For the coming year, and we've been quietly doing it for the previous year, where we can see need and for IPSA to intervene or to take on the lease ourselves, then absolutely we will.
In terms of prioritisation, there are a few things. So we've got a set criteria to decide which leases to centralise, but as we've already talked about, the MP and the landlord needs to agree. So we've had some landlords turn the proposition down. Officers needing intervention, so people who have got unsuitable space or need to move now, and we are dealing with some of those now, those will be prioritised as well. And we need to test whether or not this is a viable proposition and whether it's scalable for us. So, and there are some leases we can't take. So, for example, MPs who rent from their party or local association, or where there's a sublet agreement in place, is just very complex legally for us to take on. We plan to test the approach across a wide range of locations and lease types, so whether that's serviced or standalone, whether it's a short, medium or longer term lease. And all properties will undergo building survey, lease review. We will get some conveyancing, and MPs will need to sign a licence with IPSA to make sure that those lease terms are passed on to them as well. But we are interested in taking on more and being able to then test the proposition fully.
Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to understand a bit more about how you've arrived at the budgeted drawdown rate of 92%, particularly in view of recent history of not getting the estimate quite right and having to increase that. So could you tell us on what basis you've arrived at 92%, how confident you are that this will be sufficient, and also what the 100% is based on? So I'm particularly interested in whether the 7.7 million central staffing fund, if somebody draws down on that or you allocate some of that fund, is it possible that some offices will return 105% of their drawdown? Or how are you going to deal with that so we've got good visibility of how that fund is being used?
Yeah. So the 92% drawdown reflects actual spending patterns for 25 and 26. Within year expenditure...
What's the current level that we just agreed?
So based on last year, we submitted an 89 to 90% drawdown. We extended
this is
that.
Higher than
this is higher, yes. So within year expenditure, averaging around that 90%, we think that 92% is a reasonable evidence-based assumption. In terms of the 100% figure, the main estimate at 92% drawdown assumption is £204 million, and that's across accommodation, office and staffing budgets. If MPs spent 100% of their budgets, the total estimate required would be £225 million. So there's a £21 million difference between that 92% and the 100%.
And sorry, you said it was an evidence-based, but the evidence is this year, which is a full year of all the new MPs and so on, and presumably a bit more settled in their office arrangements, was 89 to 90%. So
for 25-26, that was the first year since the full year since the election.
And that was 89%?
Yes, and we are expecting...
So what's the evidence for increasing the expected drawdown?
Based on the feedback that we've had through the consultations, through MPs and their staff, and through conversations with SCIPSA members previously, we have agreed to increase the drawdown rate to reflect the increase in spending patterns.
So you wouldn't expect to be coming back with them?
We wouldn't expect to be coming back, all things being equal. If something happens, then we may need to create a supplementary.
What was the answer about the 7.7 million? And
7.7 million is an IPSA fund, so it isn't part of the staffing and accommodation and office cost budget. It's a centrally held fund, and we will fund separately out of that. So there will not be a position where, through that use of that fund, MPs will be overspent above 100% of their budget.
How much visibility will we have of how that's being spent? And also, if I may, Mr. Speaker, you know, for your training budget, you said, OK, £4,000 per office. Is there a danger that some people might feel that some offices are getting rewarded for not looking after their administration and business, as well as other more efficient offices that don't need to draw down on the 7.7 million fund?
We will apply that 7.7 million where it's needed most, and we will publish a report every year on that staffing support fund. So we'll aggregate that spend, so it's not going to be attributed to individual MPs, or that's one of the considerations that we're making, because we would like to understand, and it will help us with future planning, we would like to understand what the needs are. It will help us. We will publish a report on how that £7.7 million has been spent at the end.
Perhaps if I can suggest, Mr. Speaker, when we report back, if you agree, committee, on that piece of work, assessing workloads and what practical ways might be done to help address that, that might be a good moment for us to update the committee on the drawdown against that 7.7 million.
Gina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Richard and Karen. I'm going to ask some questions about IPSA's operational costs. Within subhead B, legal, professional and audit costs have increased by £324,000. That's increasing the budget fivefold. But the memorandum does not explain this. Could you tell us what's behind this increase?
So this reflects higher NAO audit fees. which have gone up because of issues with McLeod. There is support for the McLeod redress scheme within that budget, additional internal audit work, and the cost of the benchmarking tool that we use to benchmark MPs, MP staff and IPSA roles. And then there is some additional legal costs due because of the constituency office lease work, which is pretty complex. We are reviewing the balance, so we've got in-house legal counsel. We are reviewing the balance of that with external legal support where more specific needs are found to make sure that that offers us value for money as well. So overall, the changes do result in a £325,000 increase on last year's expenditure.
But sorry, again, within a flat real budget overall.
Yeah. Because I noted also from the subhead B that your consulting fee budget is more or less the same as the previous year. So costs will accrue there, you're expecting.
Back to Jess's question, with the new system, we're doing a discovery exercise and that takes consultancy. And there are less than 100 people that work within IPSA, so we would rather rely on some external consultancy than buying that resource on a permanent basis.
Sticking with operational costs, the Improving Customer Service project budget has increased by £155,000. That's around 70% increase, while the Simplifying Policy project has decreased by £443,000, around 89%. What's behind this?
So the Improving Customer Service projects includes £125,000 to upgrade our online services. For example, the current website is outdated and there are accessibility issues with that, so we need to upgrade. It's about 6-7 years old now. And we want to provide clearer guidance for MPs and their staff. There is an additional £30,000 which starts the rollout of centralised services to reduce that reimbursement process. And we will start with centralised broadband, for example, and later we will come to utilities and other services as well. The Simplify Our Policy projects reduce because McLeod, Reliance and related project work has now been completed. And there's also a reduction in some of the staff pay and conditions budget as well because we've completed pieces of work. The £35,000 review, the statutory review of MP's pay as well, for example, is removed from that work now because we've completed it.
Thank you.
All right,
just to build on that, I'm not sure I quite understand. Jessie was very eloquent about IPSA Online, and you said that you're replacing that and having a new ERP system and so on. But I couldn't see that in the budget, and you had a sort of zero for major projects. So is that being covered with your improving customer service budget? And it feels to me like it might be a bigger problem than is allowed for in the budget.
It isn't in the budget because we're not ready to implement a new system yet. We need to do a big piece of work to align our current systems, the integration of those. We are discovering at the moment, we're understanding what system might be more appropriate and we're co-designing.
Didn't the Chair answer Jessie's question by saying you were doing it this
I said we're doing three things. One is making our online content to support MPs clearer. The second is a payment system implementation. And the third will be a new back office system. But we will do those things in the right sequence and having done the discovery process.
It won't all be implemented in the
If we were to try to do all of that in 1 year, I think that would probably not be wise.
I agree. Okay, so that's why it's not
why
it's not budgeted for actually implementing.
Final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The central staffing fund that's been referred to, how will that be managed in practice? Who makes decisions? How is it managed? And it's my understanding that anybody using that fund would have to only employ people on a temporary fixed-term contract using that fund. Is that correct?
So the budget will be managed, the decisions on that staff support fund will be based on need, focusing help on officers to manage short-term workload pressures rather than providing that ongoing support and resource. And we would ask and encourage people to speak to their payroll services officer who will assess the situation and determine what help is appropriate. Requests will be considered on a case-by-case basis, but will take into account each officer's circumstances, budget impact and long-term plan. So we will have conversations with officers who believe that they need that support. And there is when we say short-term resources, that could be 6-9 months if that's what is required, just to help with emergencies, with demand that has increased, with backlogs.
Will there be a rule that the contracts with staff employed through that extra support have to be temporary contracts?
It will be likely that it would be temporary work and temporary contracts rather than full-time equivalents, but it depends on the mix of your existing staffing budget as well.
So you deal with each office on a case-by-case basis? Okay, that's worth knowing. Thank you. Right, that concludes our public evidence session. Thank you both for joining us. Richard, Karen, thank you. Order, order.